There's a story you won't hear on CNN or read in the New York Times. BRICS and Mexico are building an economic shield around Spain, not in theory, but in real time. This isn't just policy, it's rebellion. If Spain succeeds, it will mark the beginning of Europe's escape from U.S. economic control and the opening act in a wave of de-dollarization. And here's the irony. Trump may be the one unintentionally ushering in America's geopolitical decline. They said Spain was just a pawn in the Western alliance, but today, that pawn is threatening to flip the entire geopolitical chessboard. When Donald Trump launched threats of 100% tariffs against Spain citing national security and its cooperation with Chinese tech giant Huawei, he expected submission. What he received instead was a geopolitical plot twist. Spain didn't back down. It retaliated not with missiles but with alliances. Spain turned to BRICS. Then Mexico stepped in. What emerged is something no one expected: a coalition between BRICS and Mexico, standing as a firewall against U.S. economic coercion. This isn't just another trade dispute, it's the early chapter in a potential global realignment. It could mark the end of U.S. economic hegemony as we know it. Trump's grievances were loud. He condemned Spain for allowing Huawei to operate within its surveillance infrastructure. He accused the Spanish government of betraying NATO. But Spain responded not with apologies, but with action. In coordination with China, India, Brazil, and even South Africa, Spain began constructing an alternative economic future, one that sidesteps the dollar and the geopolitical terms dictated by Washington. This pivot wasn't just diplomatic, it was surgical. China offered investment in digital infrastructure. India opened new trade routes. Brazil signaled support in energy and agricultural exchanges. Meanwhile, the Spanish government, recognizing the shifting tides, saw BRICS not as a fringe economic bloc, but as a lifeline, a way to escape American economic wrath while preserving national sovereignty. Then came the surprise move: Mexico. The same country that Trump once derided, targeted with tariffs, and threatened with walls, now emerging as Spain's unexpected ally. Mexican and Spanish officials held secret meetings with Reuters, confirming direct coordination with BRICS leadership. Mexico, long dependent on U.S. trade via NAFTA, began reshaping its foreign policy, tilting eastward, embracing multipolarity. The symbolism was staggering. Mexico, once portrayed as a victim of Trump's policies, had now become an enabler of geopolitical resistance. This was more than support. It was strategic shielding. Mexico began facilitating trade links between Spain and BRICS nations. It offered logistical infrastructure and financial systems aimed at circumventing U.S. tariffs. The implications were profound. The BRICS-Mexico-Spain triangle was now not just resisting Trump's threats, it was building a counterweight to the U.S.-led global order. In Washington, panic set in. Intelligence briefings labeled Spain's Huawei collaboration a NATO security breach. The U.S. State Department issued internal memos, warning of potential backdoors and espionage risks. Trump's campaign used this narrative to attack Spain publicly, labeling it a Trojan horse within the Western alliance. His rhetoric grew more aggressive. On national stages and conservative media, he vowed to end military cooperation with any country aligning with China. But Madrid didn't flinch. Spanish officials doubled down openly, declaring that national interest now took precedence over NATO loyalty. They accused the U.S. of weaponizing economic pressure and claimed the BRICS alignment was a matter of sovereignty, not subversion. Behind closed doors, European Union leaders grew uneasy. France and Germany, already split on energy and defense policy, saw Spain's pivot as dangerous. If Spain could engage with BRICS and still remain in the EU, what would stop Italy, Greece, or Portugal from doing the same? The domino effect loomed. Western unity, once assumed, now looked more fragile than ever. What made this even more volatile was the pace at which BRICS evolved. No longer a loose club of emerging economies, BRICS was rapidly forming financial institutions, alternative payment systems, and even discussions around a digital currency independent of the dollar. For decades, U.S. dominance was cemented by the dollar's role in global trade. But if Spain could import tech export oil, and manage infrastructure using BRICS financial systems, the dollar's grip on Europe would begin to loosen. And with that, Washington's ability to enforce sanctions, project influence, and dictate trade terms would erode. But there's a deeper irony here. Trump's aggressive tactics meant to assert dominance may be accelerating America's geopolitical decline. Every time he labels a country a threat, every time he imposes a tariff or questions NATO loyalty, he pushes allies further away. He polarizes the world stage into binary camps with us or against us. And in doing so, he makes neutrality impossible. For countries like Spain and Mexico, choosing sides becomes less about ideology and more about survival. Spain's economy, strained by post-pandemic inflation and energy costs, cannot afford to be cut off from global trade. If BRICS offers financial stability, energy investment, and digital infrastructure, the choice becomes clear. It's not betrayal, it's adaptation. Mexico's role here cannot be overstated. For over a century, the U.S. treated Latin America as its backyard. The Monroe Doctrine ensured that foreign powers stayed out, and the U.S. stayed dominant. But now, with Mexico openly building bridges to China, Russia, and Brazil, that doctrine is being dismantled from within. Mexico is no longer content to be a passive participant in American geopolitics. It's becoming a player of its own. And it's not alone. Across Latin America, countries are watching. If Mexico can realign without collapse, others might follow. Brazil is already deeply entrenched in BRICS. Argentina has flirted with the idea. Even Chile and Colombia are reconsidering trade frameworks. The same shift is happening in Europe. Spain is the test case. If it succeeds, if BRICS truly shields it from U.S. pressure, then Portugal, Greece, and Eastern European nations under economic stress might pivot too. What we're witnessing is not just the fragmentation of NATO or the splintering of the EU. It's the redefinition of the global power map from unipolar to multipolar. There are risks, of course. Spain may face retaliation from the EU. Intelligence sharing with the Five Eyes could be curtailed. U.S. investment may stall. Public opinion could shift, especially if accusations of human rights compromises with China and Russia gain traction. But for now, the momentum favors disruption. Younger voters in Spain and Mexico are increasingly skeptical of U.S. influence. Polls show growing support for economic independence and multipolar alliances. In their eyes, BRICS is not the enemy, it's the alternative. So what does all this mean? It means the U.S. no longer holds a veto over Europe's future. It means multipolarity is not coming, it's here. It means that Trump, by trying to punish Spain, may have accelerated a historic pivot away from American-led globalism. And perhaps, most alarmingly for Washington, it means that other nations are watching and learning. If BRICS and Mexico can successfully block Trump's threats, shield Spain from sanctions, and build a sustainable alternative system, the question isn't if the global order is changing. It's who controls what comes next. Is this the end of U.S. dominance, or just the beginning of a new, messier, more negotiated world? The fuse has been lit, and Trump didn't stop it. He might have lit it himself. History doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through backdoor deals, investment corridors, and silent alliances. BRICS, Spain, Mexico, they're not waiting for permission. They're building something new. The only question is, will you pay attention or realize too late that the world moved on without you? The events surrounding Spain's pivot to BRICS and Mexico's quiet rebellion against American influence offer more than just a political spectacle. Beneath the headlines, there lies a deeper lesson about power sovereignty and the consequences of forcing loyalty in a world that is no longer unipolar. What happened between Trump, Spain, and BRICS is not just news, it is a signal. A signal that the era of unquestioned American dominance may be approaching a turning point and that the global stage is now open for new players. First, the primary lesson is this: economic coercion can backfire. For decades, the United States has relied on a mixture of financial pressure, trade leverage, and diplomatic dominance to maintain its position at the top of the world order. When Donald Trump threatened Spain with 100% tariffs due to its engagement with Huawei and BRICS, the assumption was that Spain would fall back in line. That did not happen. Spain, instead of retreating, chose resistance. It looked eastward. It opened its doors to BRICS, to China, to India, and to Brazil. This was not an act of defiance for its own sake. It was an act of survival. Here lies the second lesson: survival leads to innovation. Spain saw the danger of being economically isolated and chose not to panic, but to pivot. It built new trade routes. It accepted foreign investment. It engaged with countries that Western media have long painted as rivals. The result was not collapse, but resilience. Spain demonstrated that small and mid-sized nations can survive outside the traditional Western economic umbrella if they are willing to diversify and take calculated risks. Third power is no longer measured only by military might. The modern battlefield is infrastructure, data, energy, and trade. Spain's collaboration with Huawei and Chinese investors may seem like a technical matter, but it represents a strategic repositioning. Whoever controls the digital infrastructure controls the flow of information. Whoever funds the port's pipelines and surveillance systems controls the terms of trade and security. In this regard, BRICS is becoming more than an alliance. It is a parallel ecosystem, a system that offers alternatives to the institutions that have been dominated by the United States and Europe for over 70 years. Fourth allies are no longer guaranteed. Mexico's transformation is perhaps the most revealing. Once a country firmly within the orbit of U.S. policy, it has now begun to redefine itself as an independent actor. Its coordination with BRICS, its support for Spain, and its outreach to China all suggest a deep dissatisfaction with the status quo. What Mexico teaches us is that nations will eventually push back when they feel undervalued or exploited. If you build walls, rhetorical or physical, you should not be surprised when others build bridges elsewhere. Fifth, the illusion of Western unity is fading. Spain's actions, while dramatic, may not remain unique. Italy, Greece, and other EU countries under economic pressure are watching closely. If Spain can realign without immediate punishment, then others may follow. The lesson here is simple. Unity enforced through fear is brittle. True alliances are built on mutual respect, shared values, and balanced power, not on threats or conditional loyalty. Sixth, the next era of geopolitics will be multipolar, and that means negotiation, not imposition. The United States can no longer dictate terms unilaterally. The dollar, while still dominant, is no longer the only currency that matters. Countries are beginning to explore alternative financial systems. They are trading in other currencies. They are discussing digital payment platforms outside of the SWIFT network. These developments signal a future where no single country can fully control the rules of global commerce. Seventh, domestic politics now have global consequences. Trump's trade threats were aimed at reinforcing his strongman image within the United States. However, the ripple effects were international. Spain's economy, NATO cohesion, EU policy, and even Latin American diplomacy were all affected by one leader's rhetoric. In a globally connected world, the cost of political posturing is not confined to national borders. Eighth, public sentiment matters more than ever. In both Spain and Mexico, younger generations are increasingly skeptical of U.S. foreign policy. They are more open to partnerships with BRICS nations. They view economic sovereignty not as a threat, but as a goal. Politicians cannot ignore this shift. If the next generation believes in multipolarity, then the political class must adapt or risk losing legitimacy. Ninth, no empire lasts forever. History is full of once mighty powers that overplayed their hand. Rome, Britain, the Soviet Union, all fell not because of one battle, but because they refused to adapt to changing realities. The United States remains a global leader, but its influence is no longer absolute. If it clings too tightly to outdated models of dominance, it may find itself isolated, not by enemies, but by former allies who have moved on. Finally, the most personal lesson: if you're living in a country aligned with the old order, you must stay informed. Do not assume that things will stay the same. Economic realignments affect jobs, markets, currency strength, and even your digital privacy. Understand who is building your internet infrastructure. Understand which currencies your country trades in. Pay attention to where your leaders are traveling, who they are meeting, and what alliances they are forming. In the new world, silence is not safety. Awareness is power. The story of Spain, BRICS, and Mexico is not just a political headline. It is a case study in how the world is changing. It is a reminder that power is never static. It is earned, tested, challenged, and eventually redistributed. For every citizen watching this unfold, the choice is simple: adapt to the new map, or be surprised when the old one is no longer valid. In addition to the strategic and geopolitical lessons, the situation with Spain, BRICS, and Mexico also highlights deeper truths about resilience, leadership, and the evolving definition of sovereignty in the 21st century. Let us begin with the idea of sovereignty. For much of modern history, sovereignty was a passive concept, merely the right of a state to govern without external interference. But in today's world, sovereignty is dynamic. It is about control over digital infrastructure, technological standards, economic rules, and the direction of capital. Spain's decision to engage with Huawei and BRICS is a clear example. It was not simply a trade deal. It was a declaration of independence in a space long monopolized by Western influence. True sovereignty now requires the courage to explore alternatives, even when those alternatives are politically risky. This connects to a broader point: risk is no longer optional. In a globalized, volatile world, all countries face risk whether they choose action or inaction. Spain's choice to pivot toward BRICS was not safe, but neither was standing still. The status quo offers no guarantees. Those who wait for perfect conditions will find themselves left behind. The same is true for individuals, businesses, and communities. Whether it is economic policy or career planning, embracing uncertainty and planning for change is now a survival skill. Another critical lesson is that alliances are evolving into networks. Traditional alliances like NATO or NAFTA were structured hierarchical and often rigid. But BRICS operates differently. It is decentralized. It is based more on mutual interest than ideological alignment. This network-style diplomacy reflects the digital age. Just as platforms like blockchain are decentralized and flexible, international cooperation is becoming more adaptive, informal, and purpose-driven. Countries no longer need to choose between East and West. They can create their own blend. Spain is testing that idea in real time. There is also a cultural dimension to this shift. For decades, the narrative promoted by Western powers was one of superiority, technological, political, and moral. But many countries, especially in the global South, no longer accept that premise. They are building their own frameworks. They are telling their own stories. The growing appeal of BRICS lies not just in economics, but in identity. It offers countries a way to escape the shadow of colonial hierarchies and present themselves as equals on a new stage. Spain's flirtation with BRICS represents, in part, a desire to step out from under that shadow. This leads us to a more emotional, yet essential truth: dignity matters. Countries do not just want prosperity, they want to be treated with respect. Mexico's pivot is not only a strategic move, it is a response to years of political condescension. When leaders call neighbors criminals, impose sanctions without warning, or dictate trade terms unilaterally, resentment builds. That resentment may not manifest immediately, but it shapes future choices. Spain and Mexico are now making decisions not just out of interest, but out of pride. The reaction from Washington also reveals something worth examining: the limits of fear-based leadership. For decades, the U.S. maintained influence through a combination of economic incentives and strategic intimidation. But fear has diminishing returns. Once a country defies the first threat and survives, the power of future threats begins to collapse. Spain did not fold. Mexico did not retreat. That sets a precedent.